If you want to learn, you have to first listen.
Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know, a podcast to feed our curious minds. I'm Matt O'Donnell, and I want to know who you are, I want to know what you do, I want to know why it's possible for you to lead a cow up a flight of stairs, but not back down it. That's actually true. You can get a cow to go upstairs, but not down them, and I don't think anyone's ever really figured out why. I want to know what matters to you and why, because only stuff like that matters to me. I've spent the past 15 years as a professional bass player. That means I've covered a lot of miles and talked with a lot of people. I've found that the person deeply interested in a topic is often more interesting than the topic itself, and the bigger picture is found in the details. That makes for a fantastic excuse to share conversations with people who I think are great. On this episode, I will be talking with photographer Joseph Ross. We will talk more about him in a minute, but you should just know up front that he is one of the most exciting young photographers in the Nashville scene and beyond, and it was really a great honor for me to have him come hang out and sit and chat. But first, I have to address the elephant in the room. I don't know who it's an elephant in the room for, probably just me, though, as you heard when I talked to photographer Robby Klein, who introduced me to Ross. That episode was number 5, and I thought that was a cool milestone, but here we are at episode 10. That means I have broken the 3-digit numbering system for episodes, and never again can there be an episode with 2 zeros at the beginning. We're moving on to 0, 1, and here we go. We're doing it. It's happening. We're progressing onward. It's crazy how, for all the time that I thought about doing a podcast before I did it, that I maybe would have not ever really wrapped my head around the idea of having 10 episodes come out on time, in order, a real plan going. That's kind of a special thing, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. But I also want to take a minute up front, which is normally what happens at the end of the episode, to say thank you so much for listening. If you've been here, whether this is your first episode or 10th or 5th or whatever, just thank you. Our work is never done. Please remember to follow the Instagram page at Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know. Share it with your friends. There is a YouTube page where the episodes are. Sometimes that's the easiest way to share. Whatever can be done by you or I to help the show grow is only going to be a positive. And we're definitely starting to look at ways to help it grow now that there's sort of a little tiny library, kind of equivalent of like one of those free take a book libraries that you see on the corners in neighborhoods. That size library, right? But now that there's that library, we can maybe start to do some more promotion and get the word out. So more on that. Anyway, back to my guest that I'm very excited for you to hear a conversation with, Joseph Ross. I met Ross when he started to intern for Robby Klein at Taylor House, Robby's studio, and he has since become the studio manager there. That is a very exciting position to be in, but also exciting is his own photography, which has been featured kind of all over the place in some incredible situations, including billboards for Apple. Yes, that Apple. He extensively photographed the musical artist Yola, including her 2021 album, Stand For Myself. Ross did the cover photo for that. He has photos that are about to happen in the American Photography Volume 40 book. That's very exciting. And a photo that he submitted was chosen for the bronze medal in the Paris International. All that and more earned him the honor of being on the Nashville Briefing 30 under 30 list. Beyond his output, though, he is a wonderful human being who is wise and thoughtful beyond his years. It's kind of going to be hard to imagine, I would think, that you're going to hear this talk and think that he is under 30. As you listen to the episode, be sure and head over to the aforementioned Instagram page for this show at Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know. And the post for this page will have a bunch of slides that are specific photos that we talk about throughout the episode. I want to make sure that you get to see that work as it's being discussed. So enough about me, enough about the show. Let's get hyped for my conversation with photographer Joseph Ross.
Well, I need this every day. I can hear everything.
Man, I have the Apple AirPod Maxes.
Same.
And those are just such good.
Yeah, true. I guess I don't utilize those enough.
The front of house engineer on that gig had a pair, and he let me hear like a board tape through them. I was like, hey, let me hear like how my bass sounds for front of house. And he gave me them, and I went, oh, so much of it is the noise cancellation.
Yeah.
They got the noise cancellation so good on the Maxes.
Yeah.
I was just like, I need these.
I originally had a green pair, and it was the same thing. I always do this with tech. I did it with the Nintendo Switch too, but I'll buy something and obsess over it for like a month.
Yeah.
And then it'll just sit, and I end up selling it, and then I buy it again because I want it back, selling and buying and reselling. And if something comes up in photo and I'm like, oh, okay, I need like a new lens or something.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that something in my house is like sitting.
Yeah.
That's a discount on the lens.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Then I can sell that and justify the lens or whatever.
The first thing that I kind of want to know is just because I don't have a sense as much. Where do you see your career right now as a photographer?
Oof.
Like how do you view that right now? How does that
Just all of it?
Yeah, how does that like lens look to you if you were describing it?
Yeah, it's funny you ask because I've actually been kind of going through these different realizations about my career. And I also feel like I think about it in stages. Well, obviously everyone thinks this way, but it's like past, present, future.
Yeah.
And I think why I am currently having some realizations is because of how quickly things happen for me, which a lot of people know about. I mean, I moved to Nashville. It'll be 6 years in a few weeks.
Yeah.
I moved to Nashville to pursue photography and didn't know much about it when I moved here. And, 6 years later, I'm where I like would never have imagined being. So I think at the same time as like having to, experience this career in an accelerated way, I'm also having to like slow down and be like, oh, what do I like actually want?
Yeah.
Out of this as I am and as I have learned everything and I'm still learning and experiencing new things in the industry, what do I want the future of this to look like? And I think right now I'm still in the phase of like, I'm still emerging, right?
Yeah.
Like I think I'm producing really good work and I've done some really, really cool things.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm still in this phase of like getting my name out there and like really trying to make sure that I'm like at the same time staying rooted in my Nashville community and wanting to like be a photographer here.
Yeah.
And I think before this year, I was always looking at LA and New York and just like, I was on this timeline of like, okay, when am I going to be good enough to move there? Or like, when am I going to be ready to like dive into the New York or LA scene? And as of recent, it's definitely been like, well, you don't necessarily like have to, that doesn't have to be your storyline. Like I, for the longest time was just like, Nashville's just a stepping stone.
Yeah.
And once I'm done with it, I'm going to move up to New York and LA,
Yeah.
And for some reason that was like the point in which I was telling myself I would have made it, But yeah, now, I mean, I think once I let go of that, once I let go of like that expectation, or once I decided that Nashville was worth kind of like developing myself in and like, once I realized I wanted to be here, I guess you could say, things started to change as far as community goes. I think you stop looking like so far outward, you kind of see like what's going on around you. And recently I've experienced community in a different way than I have in the last 6 years. And I think that's like a really good and encouraging sign for me that I can have what I said I wanted in New York and LA in Nashville, you know?
I never go into these with like just a Santa list of questions, more just like thinking about things. And the last I knew, you know, you were thinking about going somewhere else and that. So, but like, what was that draw? And furthermore, what has changed about Nashville that like made it like a solid thing for you?
Yeah. I just wasn't necessarily seeing in Nashville the things that I wanted to be seeing as far as like jobs that were coming in for me. Like a few years ago, I wasn't too interested in country music at all. Like I didn't even listen to it. Couldn't really stand to, honestly. Just to be quite frank.
I mean, same sometimes, and I still do it. I've been playing bass in country music for 15 years, and like sometimes I just go, I don't want any of that anymore.
I just was not into it. And I was like, oh, I want to be a little bit more in the hip hop scene or like just the pop scene in general. I really wanted to like tour with pop artists and like be that photographer for different artists. I wanted to shoot all of these major editorials that I saw people in New York and LA shooting and all of that thing. And it was kind of the obvious path that I think like new photographers want to take. It's like celebrity and all of the glitz and the glam and all the things we see on Instagram.
Because that's real life.
And I'm like happy in a sense that that's the way that I was thinking, because I was working towards something and I was relentlessly wanting to get to the level of like being able to compete in that market, in those LA, New York markets. So I'm not like saying that thought process was bad or like anything like that. But so I started photographing this artist named Yola, who at the time was, I think, identified as a country artist, and now is kind of like she's
just out there.
All of it. Yeah. She can do it all. But that was my intro into kind of the Black country music and Americana scene. And that's when things started to shift a little bit. And that's when I started getting interested in what was going on in Nashville as far as the music industry goes. Because I was being introduced to a history that I had never heard of and had never learned about. And that was, you know, Black people's involvement in country music and Americana and bluegrass and all of that stuff, long before all of what's happening now, you know?
Yeah, like, absolutely. It's hard to find that history.
Right.
You know, I mean, some of it's about, I think, tying together these threads that are there, but we just don't do a good job of celebrating it, you know?
Right.
Until very recently, you know, like we're trying, but.
Right. And that's the thing, like you've noticed how many people are like, oh, yeah, this is like kind of cool. Like people outside of Nashville, Black people outside of Nashville who have never even like known, aside from like Darius Rucker, maybe, that country music artists existed. But as I kind of started to develop an appreciation for those artists in that genre, I wasn't even necessarily like wanting to get into shooting that. I just genuinely was inspired by the fact that there were people working in a space that was like so difficult to move through.
Yeah.
As artists and as people who genuinely love country music, who like didn't feel invited to love country music.
Yes. And
that's what was fascinating me. And that's what kind of showed me that there was a community in Nashville that I wanted to explore and like kind of root myself in. I think that was good for me, because once I kind of let go of that idea of needing to like use Nashville as a stepping stone, I started to feel a little more at home here, and like I think people started to like appreciate my work a little more, you know, because I wasn't like,
you weren't being transient about it.
Yeah, I was just doing things more authentically, honestly. Once I decided that, you know, you can't just come into a place and use it up and then move on, you know, like.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said about like, I still think that you probably have a great path towards working in the spaces and levels you want to in places like New York and LA, but sort of embracing Nashville
Right.
and like having it be like the bottom of the funnel for you, or like a reverse funnel.
Right.
I hate to use the word roots, and being like rooted about it, but
truly.
but by doing that, you can, instead of being, transient is a good word for it, of being like, I'm just going to do this and like, scorched earth this and then go there, you can much more just be like tethered to this as like a home and like an establishment for yourself, and then like move out that way.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, this is where it all started and where it's happening. So like,
you can't run away from that. Like,
to
you
even
have no
think that I
chance.
could was just like, dude, what is going on? Yeah. As of recent, I've acknowledged that, and I've kind of been like, yeah, this is your home, and like, this is where you create, and this is where people and those things. And again, I don't think I do still want to move to those places. Like I do still want to have a career in New York or LA.
Yeah.
But when that time comes, then I'll get there when I get there.
Yeah.
So I feel like since then I've kind of just been, this year's kind of been wild. I can't lie. I don't even know where to start with that, but I think this year I'm laying the groundwork for a career that I think will be really fruitful. I finally like feel that. Like I finally feel like the work I'm producing is something I'm happy with and something that people enjoy. And my, involvement in the photo community and the arts in Nashville is something I really treasure, and like it means a lot to me. So that's where I am right now. I don't have any like major goals for this year. I just really am enjoying like being here, and
Yeah, it's hard to do, your 5-year plan and 10-year plan and stuff, especially in work for hire in the arts. Like that is just, or I think that the way that people go about their 5-year plan, you can only plan for certain things.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily be like, I want, very specific things. Like it's more ethos based, and like how to do things that feed that ethos rather than being like, I mean, there's always nice things to like, I want to shoot this person and this person, or like, like I'd love, or for, like me being like, I want to, do sessions for like these kind of people. I want to get in like to this scene or whatever. It's like, a lot of it's about just producing good work, being open to things. Like the older I get, like the more that is important. Right. It's funny that you talk about like a welcoming thing here. I mean, culturally, it was just definitely not a city for me when I moved here in 2009. There weren't coffee shops. Yeah. There was a good rock scene and stuff like that, but musically diverse, it just wasn't happening quite that way. And so it has gotten a lot better for me, I think, in a lot of the same ways that like of you just like finding a thing and being like, especially I grew up around New York, and so like that, and then went to college in Boston. And so like those are things that like those kind of city things are like, oh, that feels like home, that feels good. But moving to Nashville was very much like, well, I appreciate this like sort of rural thing, but also there's like some city, and I guess I'll get by or whatever. And then the other thing about being a touring musician is like, then you have to go out to all these other places in the country and deal with that culture shock and stuff like that, and feel how it relates to here. So is it correct that you like weren't like super into photography when you moved here?
No, I just didn't know. I didn't know anything about the industry. Like I went to college in a small university in Arkansas. And I have my degree in speech pathology and audiology. And
that's
so that year, my senior year, I picked up a camera because I had made a friend in the town I went to school in who was shooting kind of like creative editorial work. And I kind of just tagged along with her. And that's when I was like, oh, I mean, I've always taken photos. Like I was really into like iPhone photography, and I had a Nikon, whatever the kit Nikon was at the time from Costco.
Yeah.
I had that with like the 3 lenses and the bag and all that stuff. So I was shooting regularly. I was just kind of that guy with the camera, And in my senior year, I just did not want to go into the medical field or like any form of what I'd planned for myself my whole life up until then, you know. I'd gotten really discouraged and was like, I don't think I'm built for this. Like, I don't think I can do this like thing every day and be happy about it.
I think a lot about college and what kinds of people should go to college. I don't like, I think college is useful. I'm not ready to tear down like higher education yet, but I definitely don't think it's for everybody.
Right. I wish I'd had that conversation out of high school.
Yeah.
Because I was a good student. I could do it if I wanted to.
Yeah.
You know? But I also think knowing myself now and kind of who I've become since college and high school, I think I would have benefited from a couple of years off.
Yeah.
Of doing literally anything else.
Like, I think about that, you know, the countries that have like mandatory army service. Not that I think that everyone should be like, America definitely doesn't need everybody to be in the army after high school for a couple of years, but something like that, like if you had to go do some sort of civil service for do like the post office, like,
anything like something that kind of got your life started, you know. I changed my major 4 times in college because I was so unsure about everything. And even when I graduated college again, I was like, I don't know what's happening. And I ended up telling my sister is the only person I told that I was not doing the plan.
Yeah.
My sister is such a brilliant person, went to Spelman and Emory and Johns Hopkins and worked for the CDC and all those things. And she's 15 years older than me. So she was just always the blueprint for me.
For sure.
But also my biggest supporter and has always, you know, been there. So I called her first and I was like, yeah, there's no way. Like I can't. I'm in my senior year. It's all paid for. I can't do it.
Yeah.
And so she's like, yes, like super empowering. Go for it. And I like called my mom, complete opposite.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
How dare you? And I was like, I get it now. But at the time I was like, how dare you? Like, you don't support me? Like, this is wild. Of course, now what I realize is the punch to the heart she took after having sacrificed so much, right?
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. Of course.
So that's what I understand now. But I ended up telling everyone I was going to take a year off to like study a little bit more for grad school and all that good stuff. So in that year I was supposed to be studying, I moved to Nashville and really just to like see what was going on.
Yeah,
like the friend of mine I met in the town I went to college was moving here and she was like, hey, I know you don't know what you're going to do. You should come along and
just come hang out and
see what happens. Yeah. So got a job. I bought a new camera. I bought the Canon 5D Classic, which is like circa 2006.
Yeah.
Compact flash, that type thing. I bought that camera because it was full frame and I was like, yeah, full frame. That's all I hear about. So I'm like, that works. Moved here. Just every day hitting people up on Instagram to shoot, you know, just trying to see if I liked it and if I liked the vibe of everything and if I could create some sort of portfolio that I was happy with. So I was into it. I moved here interested in it, but I was unsure about whether or not I was actually going to like dive in and really
for sure
chase it.
In talking about like talking to your sister and talking to your mom about that was like, you were saying about that your sister's reaction was like good and like really like empowering about that. Based on like what I said, did she have sort of a vibe to that discussion, like because she was older, that she understood what it was like to not know? Yeah. I think that's such a thing in, again, talking about how like college isn't for everybody. And even if it is, it's hard to like pin down a major, as you found out, you know, like it's like you just have to like pick something. And I find myself hard pressed outside of like business people to find people that don't think that there's some value in the realization. Like, I know for me, the question that always comes up when people ask like, what did I get out of going to Berkeley? And it's like, I got a great classroom music education, but I learned so much more about the world of music just from meeting other students. Right. Like, I think to most people, it's never about the degree, you know, like you get life out of it.
Exactly.
Because for so many people, it's the first time you're away from home and
Exactly.
just doing that kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
do you think that that was like part of her thing or?
I think so. I mean, between her and my mom and myself, that's almost like 3 generations of life experience.
Yeah,
you know?
sure.
Like,
I mean, if she's 15 years older, then that's.
yeah, that's like my mom growing up with 10 other siblings in New Orleans, like having to like fight a little harder than obviously both of us had to. And then my sister, I think my sister, with me growing up as her biggest fan, she kind of knew I was following her or just like following whatever my, role model was doing.
Yeah.
And so I think when I told her, she was kind of like, oh, okay, you finally found like,
it's not like she was
what you're passionate about.
She wasn't like Zooey Deschanel in Almost Famous, where she tells him like before she leaves, like, don't do it.
Like she would have been supportive regardless.
Yeah.
If I become a doctor or whatever. But I think that conversation for her is more so like, oh, okay, finally he's like, he landed on something, hopefully.
Right.
He's going to experiment. But yeah, it was quite the year of going back and forth with those two.
Yeah. So remind me, because I don't remember. Where did you grow up?
I was born in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And moved to Memphis beginning of 6th grade. And then grew up there.
Yeah.
And from there went to college.
Yeah, I knew it was a lot. It's funny because I know that you have a New Orleans connection through like, your family. And then I had remembered that you have life experience in some of the classic cities of the Southland.
Yeah. So all the families from New Orleans. I'm like one of the only ones not born there, raised there.
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of did a lot of hopping between the 3.
How old was your mom when you were born? If your sister's 15 years old?
She was 19 when she had my sister. So like 30.
So like 34 or something like that. Yeah. It's about the age my parents were, which I just turned 38 and it makes me feel kind of old.
Yeah.
Now to be like, especially for us trying to have kids and like being like, well, now I'm older than my parents were.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, I was like, I have old parents.
That random internal clock.
Yeah. And just being like, all my friends' parents are way younger than my parents. And now I'm like, fuck, I'm older. This is not good.
No.
No, I mean, that is 30 years or whatever since I was thinking that has greatly changed. But, yeah, there is something though about having slightly older parents that having life figured out is an illusion.
Yeah.
Honestly. there is no age that you go, by this age, I'm going to have this figured out.
And I realize that now with my friends who have kids, I'm like, oh, you have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah, that's right.
Which means my mom had no idea what she was doing probably when I was, growing up or whatever, but it happens to everyone, I guess.
Yeah, certain things come for everybody.
Yeah.
So how long were you in Nashville before you started interning for Robby?
I moved to Nashville like end of May 2018.
Yeah.
And I met Robby August of 2019.
Okay.
So a little over a year.
Yeah.
And I'd actually messaged Robby in that first year I was here. I think I DM'd him on Instagram.
Yeah. And
he didn't respond. And then when I emailed him again, that was after kind of like a summer away from Nashville. I don't want to say burned out, but I needed to leave to like recoup. I've been here for a year.
Yeah.
Now I need to figure out if I'm going to pursue this or like not. So
yeah, especially if you were looking for something,
right.
Like at the very least, when I moved to Nashville, like I knew what I was doing, and like, which is what I've done.
Right.
It took time for it to happen, but it never, except for once. There was one time I thought that I was going to apply for a job at Jazz at Lincoln Center, like a program director assistant. And that's the only time I ever was like thinking that I would like bail on this. And that was just because it was New York and it was like Jazz at Lincoln Center. I'd be in Columbus Circle every day. Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
But other than that, like, yeah, you came here like looking for something that you didn't know.
Oh, I literally, so I graduated from college. I moved into like my fraternity's house. We didn't call them fraternities, but it was like the equivalent. I went to a Christian school, so it was clubs.
Right. Yeah.
And so I moved into there. I was there for like a week and a half, 2 weeks. And someone hit me up that was in Nashville who knew that I was maybe thinking about it and was like, hey, this like coffee shop is like hiring if you want to call in or, submit an application. And so I did, got hired the next day, and they were like, hey, can you start like Monday, which was like 2 days away. And I was like, yeah, definitely, totally. And my car was actually still packed from when I left campus. So I just hopped in the car. I think I had like $200 to $300. I was like calling friends on the way to Nashville. And I called Madison, who's a old friend of mine from college who I like went to formal with that winter before. And I was like, hey, you live in Nashville. Like, do your parents have a spare room? Literally stayed with her parents for the first 3 weeks of being in Nashville. And yeah, it was I'm very in tune, I think, with my intuition. And it was just like a no brainer. Like, this is what you said you were going to do. And things are being laid out in front of you. And like, you just need to decide which road you're going to take. Yeah. And so that just happened to be what I did. I was just like, yeah, I'm just going to go see what happens. And if I was kind of in the headspace of like, I thankfully have family that I can fall back on, you know, and that was kind of what I was leading with. I was like, my mom lives in Memphis. That's only 3 hours away. If this doesn't work out, I'll just go running back and like tell her she was right, but I had to try
on like a Tuesday if you wanted to.
Right. I had to try regardless. So, very, very quick in my decision to move to Nashville. But in that following summer, I ended up going back to Memphis. I moved in with my mom. That's when I was like, okay, I need to make some like major decisions here, whether or not, I'm going to pursue graduate school, because that window for me was kind of not closing. I mean, you can always go to grad school, but like for me, my things I learned in my degree weren't being retained. I wasn't like, I was like, I need to go if I'm going to go. Yeah. So that whole summer I just spent traveling, and like I ended up going up to New York and interviewing with Parsons for their Master of Fine Arts program, which was pretty promising. I mean, they really enjoyed the portfolio that I built that first year in Nashville, but I needed a full ride and they only gave away one. Oh, okay. And so that application wasn't going to be due until December of 2019. So I was like, okay, that's a good plan. I can do that. I can move back to Nashville for the fall and winter, continue to work on this portfolio and like the application, and then I'll submit, and then I'll go to Parsons in June of 2020. That's when that would start. Again, same thing that happened when I was in Arkansas moving to Nashville. It was just like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I need to figure it out. Yeah. And options were laid out in front of me. I was like, if I'm going to move back to Nashville, I need to work at least 2 jobs. I just need money. Yeah. Especially to save up for potentially moving to New York. Yeah. So like, it just all worked out. I went back to the coffee shop I was with. I was working at Imogene and Willie, and then doing some like at home stuff for my mom for her business. So I was like 3 jobs, and then I decided to reach out to Robby again, which circles us back to him. But emailed him and was like, hey, again, I didn't know anything really about the industry or studio or anything. Yeah. And I emailed and was like, hey, I've got an SUV. I can move stuff around if you need, like whatever. Yeah. I can be extra hands if you need them. And so he emailed back and was like, oh, good timing. Just thinking about getting an intern.
Yeah. I was about to say, like, I didn't know that that's how you reached out. Yeah. Because like in my mind, the way that sort of happened was that you like got in on like the internship, like hunt. Kind of thing. No, you. Like, it was
just divine timing.
Oh, that's cool.
And so when he responded, I went back to Instagram and unsent my message for sure. For sure, did that. So we met that week, and gave me the keys to the studio, and thus started my real grad school. Like, truly, like I learned everything in that year.
Yeah, because you were in it like immediately.
Oh yeah, I missed. And from August to March when COVID started, I'd maybe missed 2 shoots of Robby's. Wow. Because I knew, kind of like you were saying, like you just have to be in it. You know, there's that classroom aspect of education and then just like practical. And you just had to be in it. So I was like, this is exactly what I'm interested in. Like, I have to be at everything. I have to be on every shoot, have to be assisting. I have to be like on call basically.
Yeah, for sure.
And that was great. I thankfully worked for people, you know, the coffee shop in Imogene and Willie. They were super like, they were wonderful at realizing that my career goals weren't with their company.
Sure.
And that there's other things I was, you know, working towards, and they were more than gracious to work with me and allow me to take time off to focus on the internship.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing. Like, I never worked another job.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't say that. I have this stupid thing that I say all the time. It's not stupid. I mean, people find it impressive, and it is almost by and large true,
Mm-hmm.
that the only non-musical job I've ever had is being a ski instructor. Except for these like 2 weeks where I temped for a company that was helping people get out of their shitty timeshares.
Yeah.
And I was doing some data entry.
Yeah.
That 2 weeks is the only other like job.
Wait, where did you instruct?
In Northeast Pennsylvania,
Wow.
where I grew up. Yeah. A lot of like small mountains there. Anyone that does serious skiing would look at those and be like, this is bullshit. But if you're trying to work as an instructor, you want the bullshit mountains because those are not intimidating to people who want
practice
to.
Mountains.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I did so much skiing on like what would be considered a hill.
Yeah.
But you know, that was my first job, and I would make a bunch of money for 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I was in high school and college. Like, what did I need that much money for? And so I would just like ride that into the next winter and then back up again. And it was just cyclical like that for years. So I say that to illustrate that I didn't have to do any jobs like really here. I was kind of working in music and had some pad from, you know, building up money from that kind of stuff and like working in college, like the work study stuff I did, which like I consider that music things, like when I was one of the office assistants for the dean of music technology. It's like, yeah, I was doing a lot of computer work and stuff, but it's like in music, and you know, that like that to me counts.
Yeah.
And so, but I imagine that most smart people in places like a cafe or whatever know that people just aren't gonna be, you know, that most of their prospective people are not career coffee professionals. And so being like, well, I'm doing all these shoots. It makes
I mean, and then 80% of the people I work with are all musicians.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's like they had shows and tours, and it's very much rooted in, I think, the Nashville, you know, workforce. Like,
unless you're an asshole as a manager, you know, like or an owner, like, you know that you're cobbling together staff, you know,
true among
people. You just got to like overhire, and then, you know, you'll have 60% of people at any of your staff at any one time out. The 40 is what fully staffs your places.
Yeah. No, but that first few months is really what solidified my like drive and ambition for the career that I saw for myself.
Yeah.
Like, I was working pretty much every day. I would get up and open at the coffee shop. So I had to be up at like 5 a.m.
Yeah.
I would work until noon. I would like sprint home to take a nap for like 20 minutes. And then I would go into Imogene at 1 and then close Imogene.
Jeez.
And that was when I wasn't on set with Robby.
Right. Yeah.
And I think like in that moment again, my intuition was everything to me. And I knew, I could see that like this was the exact formula that I needed to like at least get me to the next step.
Yeah.
You know? And so I was just going with it. I didn't experience any sort of exhaustion, or like, I really was just on autopilot. Yeah. Like, if this is what I have to do, then it's going to get done.
Yeah. Because
this is like what I see for myself a year from now, or whatever the case may be. So of course we weren't expecting what 2020 brought us, but
yeah, for sure.
Super grateful to have been submerged into the internship as my learning experience and really the foundation for where I am now. Honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not telling you anything that I think you don't know, or anything that I think would be like an information betrayal. This is like as low level as possible. But yeah, from like the time you started working for Robby, like the line was that you were like a super hard worker and like confoundingly dependable. You know, like exactly what you are describing was visible like to Robby like immediately, because he would tell us, because we were, you know, hanging out at his house, like, multiple nights a week, like within a few weeks of you starting there, it was like apparent that you were like the guy.
It was definitely, I will say, it was not sustainable.
Sure.
As I'm saying, like that was a lot. And that was a fear of mine. I was like, I'm going to make myself so indispensable that it's going to actually hurt me, like, because I actually physically probably shouldn't be doing all of this. I would be working those 2 jobs in a day. And if there was a shoot the next day and the psych wall needed to be painted, then I would go to the studio after.
Right.
That would be my third job of the day.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, thankfully I was in this mindset of like being able to do that. But I've been at the studio for 19, 21, like almost 5 years now.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say my work ethic has decreased, but I think I'm just like, it just wasn't a sustainable way of working. But I think it was necessary for when it happened, like.
There's always room to like ease up off the gas sometimes after you do something like hard and methodically, and then realize that you can still, you put in the hours, the 10,000 hours theory and stuff like that. Like once you put in the hours, you have the systems and operations thing in your brain so well that like once you ease off the gas of like time commitment, you can still accomplish nearly, if not all, the same amount of stuff with less sweat equity and effort because you have gained some mastery and regulatory out of it.
Actually, I want to correct myself. I wouldn't even say that it wasn't sustainable. I more so want to outline like the way that position had to develop because of how quickly things were happening for me. Right.
Yeah.
And I talk about this all the time. The fact that Robby has and is willing to make those adjustments. Yeah. Because, I interned from August to March. From March to December, I went full-time photography in the midst of like the pandemic. Yeah. So that was just like the wildest thing ever. Yeah. For me to have been doing this thing so relentlessly and then being pushed into lockdown and then going full-time and the studio not being busy at all. Yeah. To like the studio slowly opening up again. Right. Like it was just such a wild ebb and flow of like my career growing, the studio schedule fluctuating because of the pandemic. And thankfully Robby and I would have these talks like every like 6 months and be like, okay, what's next? Yeah. Like, how is this going to continue to work? And how are we going to like evolve this position into, something that works for both of us and can still like provide for all things needing to be provided for. So I went from intern to studio manager to, kind of just right hand man at this point.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like the word that you used before was indispensable. And I think that that's like a legitimate thing. It's like at some point it becomes like, well, what am I going to do if I don't have this intern anymore? Right, and it's like, well, do the means justify that and stuff? Man, I think about those early post immediate lockdown shoots that happened because a lot of those Amanda was catering like lunch for at the time. It's crazy to think of how that got going again because there were just so many questions.
So many.
And I mean, obviously I don't know the half of them that you do, but just having like heard about it and thinking about like, well, how do we do temp checks? And like, well, there aren't COVID tests yet because by that time that didn't, and how to deal with that and like distance and
also like a little bit of guilt, like,
sure,
because LA and New York were still closed, like no way they were working. Yeah. And so to be in a place that was and having to be like, feel a little bit of guilt, but also be like, well, I mean, we have to work, like the markets aren't as big as New York and LA. Like if we have an opportunity to do so and do it safely, then like we have to try. Yeah. And that's kind of what it was for me. I had to quickly let go of the guilt because again, I went full time. I was like, this is my window. Yeah. So I have to kind of do it and make sure I'm doing it right, but also safely. And it was an interesting time for sure.
Yeah. So how would you describe your photography in terms of style and thought process prior to really getting into working at Taylor House? Because I'm going to ask how that, transformed in that first like year.
Mm-hmm. I really didn't have a style or like a thought process. I really liked light.
Yeah.
Obviously at the start it was a lot of natural light and modifying that. And then once I started interning, it became studio because I was learning about it.
Yeah.
But I really was just in that mode of like soaking in everything that inspired me and everything that I liked and just trying it.
Yeah.
I think I was in that stage of my creative process for like a couple years, maybe 2 to 3 years of just like trying, failing.
Sure.
Going back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
And maybe in the last year and a half, I'm like finally kind of like, I can walk into any situation and, get something out of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I started with no process.
Yeah, that's interesting. So like,
well, I think I will say, I think my eye has always been a bit more editorial. Just the way I see things, I think it's in that editorial style, I will say. Like for some reason, I was always photographing things for like words, like space for words for some reason. And I think I was just naturally kind of drawn to that framing and composition of an image.
Yeah. Also, I mean, you have such a good eye and acumen for style that I think that editorial stuff is suitable that way, because like I haven't watched you like direct a shoot, but I can probably easily imagine you styling like an editorial shoot or like finding spots and things like that are really going to work for that kind of thing.
I was definitely most inspired by fashion photography in those earlier years, for sure.
I see plenty of your work go by on Instagram, and I think of like a lot of like your stuff as being very expressive in that way, or like capturing fashion stuff like in motion is very like helpful to like fashion photography doesn't work so great when someone's just like plain standing. Like you want to catch those, and like not when they're like running either, like all runway photography, but like catching those little like almost like blur your eyes in the cracks kind of things of like just shifting from pose to pose.
Right.
Like that when that motion happens, because that is even high art fashion. Those moments are like the real life movement instead of doing like dramatic stuff. I mean,
movement
not the dramatic stuff
isn't.
Yeah. But I mean, there's always room for big expressive movement. But I think that to me, some of my favorite like fashion photography stuff comes with what at least my brain perceives as like someone's like everyday natural motion, just kind of like shifting their body and stuff.
Love it.
And I think that you do a great job of like, not necessarily portrait stuff, but like single subject kind of things, like capturing that thing really well.
Movement and light are two keywords for me. I'm obsessed with lighting because it's never ending, right? Like,
right.
For as long as I'm doing this, I'm going to be obsessed with it and experimenting with it. And I think that's the most fun part of the job, honestly, is getting to be creative with that. But yeah, I've always loved movement. I've always loved the energy that gives a photo.
Yeah.
I can take a still photo of someone.
Of
that's
course,
fine. But like, I think that movement, kind of like you were saying, is where you kind of like get to know that subject a little bit better. There's a photo actually that was just recognized. This is a Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know exclusive.
Oh, shit.
That was just recognized in Paris, in the Paris International Black and White Photo Competition. And the shot specifically was like after we had called for the next look. Like it was like, all right, let's, move on. And then she'd like moved a certain way. And then it was like, snap, the best photo, one of the best photos of the year. And it was an expression that she was giving that was kind of like, she was someone that didn't love to be photographed.
Yeah.
So the way I photographed her in that moment, you can tell that she was kind of just like, the weight kind of had just fallen off of her.
Yeah, because she didn't necessarily think she was being photographed anymore.
Right. It was kind of like, okay, I get to relax until the next one, And it's such a beautiful image to me. It's one of my favorite images I've ever took. But yeah, the movement in that photo, which I'll show you later, is perfect to me.
Yeah, that's cool. Some of my favorite like photography in general, Robbie and I talked when he was on the show about like a lot of great like Rolling Stone covers and stuff like that, things that like
Mm-hmm.
are iconic like that. And I love a lot of that stuff, but I love journalism photo.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it should come as no surprise. We were talking before we started recording about how much I fucking love documentaries and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. And it's because I think that real life has so much more to offer than fiction.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many things that happen in the real world that are wilder
Mm-hmm.
and more unbelievable than anything that has ever really like been written in fiction.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of that like old time life stuff really just kills me. And it's because none of it's posed.
Right.
You know, like those people aren't thinking about being photographed. They're just doing it. And you mentioned like tour photography before too. And that's a whole other thing, because when you're on tour and there's a lot of photography going on, like eventually you just stop remembering that someone's doing it, and you get all these like, you know, great shots out of it.
Mm-hmm. I think when you pair that real world thing that's happening with an editorial eye, it's like unstoppable.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It's unreal.
Do you like paintings? Are you like into like art?
Yeah, I'm not an art history buff, but
Sure.
I can appreciate.
I was thinking about it when you were talking about light, because it was something that I didn't bring up when Robby and I were talking about light. Is I think some of the most incredible painted art is when people are really thinking about light and how to like put light in, and they're literally manufacturing it.
It's insane.
And movement. I'm a really big fan of Caravaggio.
Okay.
And that stuff is just all about that. Like there's like light sources are such a huge thing, and then also like there's all this like twisted like human movement in it. Like it's very realistic, but like none of it looks like it's posed. Like it's all like scenes that are happening.
Painters would make great photographers, if not photographers, lighting directors, because they can see it.
Yeah.
You know, they can literally take a scene out of their head and put it on a canvas, and that's incredible to me.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people just can't see light like that, you know, like, and I think the best way I train my eye is like to always look for it, because I want that kind of like mindset, and like, you know, I want to be able to process light that way, to just like see it like a painter sees it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's incredible. I think about that every time I see a drawing or like a painting.
Yeah. I've never thought about this like quite this way before, but I wonder what like Da Vinci could have done had he lived in like the age of even rudimentary cameras. It's wild.
Give Da Vinci a couple pro photo lights.
Yeah.
Do something with these. Let me see what you can do.
I should think about that more. I'll probably be real high later thinking about this idea like of like what artists could have done, or like even like anyone, if they had access to like technology that developed in like in their way afterward. So I think we're right at about the point, like talking timeline wise and stuff, about some stuff that you were talking about earlier in realization, like not too long after the period we're talking about is when like the Apple thing happened for you. And talk about that, because that was super fucking cool. And like, is that thing you were referring to of being like accelerating really fast and then
for sure.
You know?
It's funny because, man, that was equally such a wonderful opportunity, but also the most stressful, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
I do want to preface by saying that some crazy like synchronicities have happened to me and continue to. And this was a major one, like pretty huge. The year before. So I got the email about the Apple campaign in fall of 20.
Remind me what the Apple campaign was like, or
it was for what iPhone was it? iPhone 12?
Yeah, something like that.
It's for the iPhone 12 Pro.
Yeah.
Because it was the second camera that had the 3 lenses.
Okay.
Apple had essentially reached out and asked they reached out to 15 to 30 Black photographers in 15 to 30 different cities.
Yeah.
And asked them to shoot on iPhone for a week, just of their like life and their artistic process and things that they find beautiful in their city. So that was 2020 when I got the email. So I think it was November of 2020. A year earlier, when I'd started interning for Robby, I was on my first or second job with him, and we were on lunch, and we were getting to know one another, and he was asking me like who some of my favorite photographers were, and I mentioned Justin Bettman, who happens to be a great friend of Robby, and I wasn't aware of that. But Justin had just shot the iPhone 11 campaign, like the main one, introducing the 3 lenses. And in that conversation with Robby at lunch, I was referencing that shoot. I just thought it was like, Justin is known for his like set builds and kind of his installations in these different places of New York City from back when he lived there. But so his campaign for Apple was 3 different sets for the 3 different cameras, essentially. And the way he lights and everything, I was just a really big fan of and still am. So a year later, when I get the email, it's the week of the election. It's the day of the election, actually.
What a time.
What a time.
Oh, man.
And I'm not kidding. I dedicated that day to the election. I was like, I'm not leaving my couch. This is going to be a really hard day.
Yep.
I literally went and got a pizza and ice cream. And I was like, I'm just gonna sit in this fear and like anxiety and just be miserable all day. I just really allowed myself that day. And the Sunday prior to that, I had gotten an email from like the App Store, like the Apple Store, and there was a receipt for an app. And I literally thought in my head, I was like, I wonder what an email from like Apple would look like if they were hiring me for a job.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding, Matt. Like, I had that exact thought, and then like 2 to 3 days later, I'm sitting on the couch during the election, like stuffing my face, crying at like the results, not sure what's happening. And a producer from Apple emailed me asking if I'd want to do the campaign. And I turned my TV off and I just like sat there. I was so overwhelmed. I was like,
which is crazy because you were dedicated to like watching the election happen, which also, I mean, thank God that something happened for you to take a moment, because we were settling in for a week of that shit, you know?
Who would have known?
You know, it's watching like, how many votes? Okay, 10,000 more coming in. Okay, cool. Let's see what's going on.
Still on the couch.
Yeah, all right, cool. But that was going on. But
oh yeah, I mean, I took a screenshot of it and sent it to Robby, and I was like, does this look right? Like, knowing I had seen the Apple logo, I looked up the producer. She was legit. Like, I knew.
You looked at her email address to be sure that it came from like
that came from Apple campus.
Yeah.
I just had to hear from him. I needed him to tell me that was legit, like, because it was the biggest job I've ever gotten.
Of course. Yeah.
And I was like basically asking him if this is what this would look like, you know, is this a scam or like what? He was like, oh, I wish I could pull the text up. He was like, oh, you son of a gun, or like something like that. And that's when I knew. I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, this is legit. And so, I actually don't know how much I can like say.
Sure.
I shot that. They sent me the phone. I shot that for a week, and then it came out that February for Black History Month.
Right. Yep.
And it was incredible. I mean, it was, I think, when Nashville was really introduced to my work. Mm-hmm. They had put 4 billboards up across the city of the work that I shot on the phone.
I walked by that billboard every Tuesday and more days a week. Like right when we were like coming out of that, I was working much harder downtown than I had in a long time, just trying to recoup money that I hadn't been making and passing by that all the time. And it was super dope. Yeah,
it was really great. And they made it known that it was one of their first campaigns, I believe, that they were adding the photographer's full name.
Oh, okay.
Because I can't remember what the other billboards would say, but it was like shot on iPhone by like Joseph.
Yeah.
Or like last name or something like that.
Right.
And so it was like a cool thing that it was like, no, this is your work. We're going to put your name on it and it's going to be in your city. And it was so special. I photographed my nieces and nephew for the campaign for one part of it.
Yeah.
And so those were the billboards that were up. And I think at the time they were like 12, 8 and 5 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so we were actually on vacation family vacation the week that the billboards went up, and I didn't know when they were going up. Mm-hmm. And so after vacation, they ended up driving to Nashville so we could all see it and experience it together. I was getting DMs from random people like that I'd never met or didn't even follow on Instagram who were like sending me pictures of it and being like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Or a guy from his like high-rise apartment sent me a video of one of the billboards being installed.
That's cool.
Which was sick.
Yeah. Oh, shit.
I was like, how did you even catch that? Like, that's insane. But he was like, yeah, they always install it here. And I just kind of look for them every time they do because, you know, Apple owns the billboards.
Yeah, right.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
So super special. I really feel like that was a pivotal point in my relationship with Nashville.
Of course,
it's like, hey, whoa, who is this guy? Like, shot by Joseph Ross. Who is that? Like, you know, where did he come from? That was kind of the energy I was getting. And it was cool to have kind of random citizens in Nashville send it to me in Instagram DMs and say congrats and stuff like that. So
yeah. And how cool that it was, you know, a photo of your nieces and nephews.
Right?
I mean, like, especially in terms of that they were being very intentional about having it be Black photographers, and so that you know, were helping, you know, cycle that forward.
Right.
You were paying that sentiment forward, and that it was in Black History Month. That's super cool.
Yeah. And they got paid very well.
Yeah.
And obviously at the time, maybe my oldest niece understood, but the two youngest just like didn't really have a concept of the amount.
Yeah.
And my sister was like, I'll give you all $50 to go to Target. And they were like, oh my gosh, $50.
Yeah.
And so I was like the best uncle on the planet.
That's right.
For like a year. They got $50 of their Apple money to go and spend at Target. So
the things you can get away with young folk. I wish I still thought $50 was a lot of money.
Right.
I mean, sometimes $50 is still a lot of money.
I think they found out when they got to Target and could only get like one toy. So
yeah.
But that was really special for the whole family.
Yeah. No, that's what I meant, is like, it's great that you were able to like take a thing that was special already and like grow it.
Yeah.
You know, in one easy step,
you
grew it out to be like a much more incredible thing than it already was.
And then if we rewind to 2018, when I made that phone call to my mom, this is when she was finally like, okay, like, I see you moving towards this thing that you were telling me about, you know, like,
it's what every artist wants, right? Like, it's like that real, is everyone wants their parent, when you're in the arts, to be the club owner at the end of Purple Rain, when he finally like nods in the cheesiest moment in a movie ever, where it's like, you were just yelling. It's like, oh, because you're playing Purple Rain, I understand now.
Yes.
I always think of that as like the stupidest acknowledgement moment.
And even then, like, I wouldn't say I still had a resentment towards her. I really didn't, but I'm living on my own. And I think I was realizing the sacrifices even more, especially after COVID and like after such a hard time in life. So her arrival to this career, this dream of mine was like more special in the sense of like, I get why you were so nervous for it. I get why you're upset, you know? And this was kind of like, I don't want to say a gift to her. That sounds weird, but it was kind of like I'm glad you can see what I see for myself, you know, finally.
Yeah, I felt that way. I mean, my parents have always been very supportive. I was in college at some point when I asked my mom, like, do you ever think that like you were worried that I wanted to be a musician? And she finally was like, oh yeah, all the time. And like, but they were very supportive and kept quiet, but I was really glad that they got to see the first show that I played at the Opry. And again, not that they had, you know, they had tons of things that they were proud of, but like that is maybe one of the things that I'm like, well, that's a real thing. Yeah. Like, that's like such a tangible moment of success, and like them getting to be there for like that was like super cool.
Especially if like they had already loved the Opry, or like, did they already love?
Not really. Okay. I mean, like they weren't. I mean, my dad passed last year. Like, they are not and were not, you know, like super country people. Okay. There were things that
they knew it was important.
Yeah. That it's, I mean, how could you not? It's a thing. What's funny is like, I didn't understand that until I did the gig. It was one of those things where I always thought like, yeah, it'd be cool to play on the Opry. Like, if it doesn't ever happen, it won't matter. And then by the time I did it, I thought a lot about how people pilgrimage to that, you know, like people center trips here around going to the Opry because they've heard it for decades on the radio and be like, I'm going to go to the Grand Ole Opry. And like, you, in a lot of ways, the success that I've had as a player is owed to what the Opry has done for the country music industry.
Mm-hmm.
And even if I wasn't, playing on the Opry or anything like that, prior to then. So getting to see people who like, it is one of that, like they'll never forget for the rest of their lives, like the time they went to the Grand Ole Opry,
Mm-hmm.
and realizing like, well, I can give something back to that establishment by being respectful and being like excited about it. And then like every subsequent time has just been like, that's really great and stuff like that. And so
I love that perspective.
Yeah. So tell me about the Yola stuff too. Cause those photos are badass and
so special,
and that you got to have like a continuing relationship like out of that rather than just like a shoot.
Yeah. So that was another very odd moment as far as synchronicity goes. That was my first or second like label like artist gig in July of 2020. A few weeks prior to that, Andy Barron had posted on his Instagram 5 of his favorite emerging photographers.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't known Andy Barron. I'd followed him.
Yeah.
But I was one of the 5, which did wonders for me.
Yep.
And then I hit him up and was just like, thank you so much. Like that is so kind, especially because I'd been such a fan of his. Turns out he was my neighbor.
Oh.
As in like across the street and like 3 doors down.
Uh-huh.
And so we were like, that's weird.
Yeah.
So we ended up, having a coffee on the porch, just getting to know one another, catching up or whatever. But I was photographing a few weeks later, the chef that I'd known from TikTok. We were at the studio at Taylor House and she was like, or I was like, what have you been listening to lately? And she was like, oh, this artist called Yola. Like, I don't know if you've heard of her. And I was like, oh no, I haven't. But I queued her up. We started listening and she went up to change for the next look. I get an email from Yola's manager.
Really?
Bro, I'm not kidding. I'm telling you, like, I wanted to cancel the shoot. I was like, I got to go sit down. Like, this is weird. Her manager, Yola's from the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Her manager
I always forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Her manager was there. Yola had just moved here before COVID, I believe. And she was like, hey, I have this artist, and we need some like press stuff at the Ryman. And your name came up. And I was like, that is insane. So that ended up, me not knowing this, but that ended up kind of being a test for them, because Yola was kind of desperately looking for someone to like really properly photograph her skin tone, which I didn't know at the time was such a taboo thing for a lot of Black people being photographed.
I'm learning about it now.
Yeah, I
mean, I hate to white boy about it.
Oh, it's okay. No, it's okay. I really didn't know that was something that people were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully I just so happened to like properly expose and like light people of color, like melanated skin.
Is that difficult? Like, is that a difficulty thing so. Or a like?
I don't think so, but a lot of photographers seem not to be able or seem not to know how to do it.
Uh-huh.
So that first shoot with her at the Ryman, without my knowledge, was like kind of we're going to see how he does. And that was great. It was wonderful. After that, was up for her album, which was coming out later that year, but the shoot was a couple months later after the Ryman thing. Ended up winning the bid for that, shot the album, incredible, amazing. And then pretty much was with her through that 2-year album cycle.
Yeah.
So whenever an editorial would come through, they would put me up for it. And most of the times I would get it, or different events around Nashville, or we went to the Grammys in 2022. 21.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
22.
I can't recall.
It must have been 22 because that was a year.
It's always so hard with the Grammys because the way their eligibility period like works.
Yeah.
That when you think of music coming out versus where it gets placed against the eligibility deadline, because it's always like October-ish.
Yeah.
That happens. And so therefore, like, you end up with like some records that you feel like, hasn't this record been out for 5 years?
Right. Okay. So we shot the album fall of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
The album came out July of 2021. So it was the 2022 Grammys.
Okay. Yeah.
For sure.
That makes sense.
Because when the album came out, we were both in New York, and we had a billboard in Times Square. So we like went to picture the billboard and all that stuff. So
yeah.
And I remember it was so special for me. I remember like walking to the billboard, listening to the album for the first time.
Oh, that's cool.
But really incredible stuff. I think it's really an honor, honestly, to get to experience an artist that way in between those big success moments for them. And Yola is one of the smartest people I've ever met, and just speaks so profoundly. And any interview and any conversation you have with her is just, it's no BS.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
yeah, she's really incredible.
Yeah. I learned a lot from her and that experience, and was really grateful to her and her publicist. And I still work with her publicist a lot.
Yeah.
So
since you were doing like all of her major stuff in that time, how do you feel, or like what observations do you have about the development of the work you were doing of her, the further along that got? Like, what did you get, unspoken access to, or like what level of comfort engaged with her? Yeah.
I mean, we were there was a boundary that I wanted. It was nothing that we discussed, but like I didn't want to be her best friend.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to support her and be indispensable.
Yeah.
For her, but I didn't want to like jeopardize the work by like getting too close personally. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but I wouldn't have assumed that you'd have done that.
Yeah, like
it's interesting.
I think there was we had a nice relationship in the sense that like we weren't, man, how do I put this?
The reason I'm interested in hearing more about that, and it's like kind of striking me at the moment, is because I think about how for musicians, there's always like in documentaries, like lots of times when there's always a bunch of photographers that are in their like just social circle and stuff like that. Always ends up that way. Like there's, especially in the 70s, there's like so many of those bands and artists that like had friends that were photographers. And so many of these like iconic photos just came out of like these like friendship moments and a hang. And you were trying to avoid that.
Not avoid it. I think I just didn't want, I know how like quickly I can dive into a relationship like that, friendship, whatever.
Yeah.
And I just wanted the work to like be most important, because that's what I was being paid for. You know?
Sure.
I think Yola really trusted me with photographing her, and we developed this work relationship where like I knew her insecurities, and I knew the way that she wanted to be photographed and the way she didn't want to be photographed. And I think that built trust over time.
Yeah.
And I was okay with that. I was really comfortable with that being where we were.
And I'm sure even though she was emerging in that time, like it doesn't take a lot of time when you're any form of celebrity for you to start experiencing like people wanting to get at you, And I'm sure that I know you're trying to like not be stringent about the word boundaries, but like by parameters is maybe a better word.
Yeah.
Like just having these parameters like built a respect for you that got to be like, it probably was more serious, like, like a let's go thing. Yeah. Like, even if that was like a more still, not like a rage, let's go, but like when you can like have professional respect like that.
Right. It was also brand new to me. Like it was the first artist that I'd work with so closely.
Yeah.
And so I might have even been playing it safe.
Yeah.
I might have really not wanted to like fuck it up.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, we're friends. Something happened and now we're not friends anymore. And, now I can't shoot you. And it wasn't, that thought process wasn't selfish, I don't think. Like it wasn't really the work is most important. It was really, I just want to protect both of us. And I want this like relationship to be built on trust. And I want to be someone who's just like present and isn't asking you of anything more than like what you're already being asked of, like by the industry, by what it takes for you to be Yola.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's super wise of you, man. Like that's for being like a very early thing like that. Like that's a decision of like great wisdom. Like that's real cool.
Yeah. And I really, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that atmosphere of like, we're just going to create. And, there were moments that meant a lot to me. Like after the Grammys, there was an after parties, obviously. And we ended up leaving the after party together. We were staying at the same hotel.
Yeah.
And I basically took her back to the hotel, and I'd had some gear in her room because we had shot portraits before the Grammys. And so I remember that night was really special. It was probably like 1 a.m. and we're back in her room, and we're just talking about life, talking about like queerness and like, what it means to be Black, and like just things that all of a sudden just evolved that night organically. I don't even know why we started talking about those things, but moments like that I appreciated, and I put in a pocket and thanked the universe for.
Yeah.
And the next day we were back to work, and that's just how it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. That's awesome. So what's next?
What's next?
What's happening next for you? Like
This year has been a lot of fun. I've been, at the beginning of the year, I told myself that I wanted to really put my work out there a little bit more. So I'm very grateful to be a part of this kind of like coalition group of people called Diversify. And it's heavy on like the journalist side of the industry, but a few, entertainment / celebrity / editorial photographers are a part of it. It's all people of color. They do a lot to make sure that we are in front of opportunities that are out there.
Cool. Is that a local thing or national or what?
It's worldwide.
Worldwide? Mm-hmm. Oh, cool.
So basically it's a database for editors and producers and whoever is in a hiring position to go to the database, pick a location, and then look at the photographers of color in that location.
Cool.
And that was something that manifested after the summer of 2020.
Okay.
So this year, I really wanted to get my work out there, put it in some exhibitions, and the database has this resource where there's just like a list of open calls for the year. And so I picked a few that I wanted to submit to. Yeah. And the first one was American photography, which is, in my opinion, like one of the biggest like honors of an editorial or, any photographer actually in America. All of the photographers I look up to are like in it every year. So it's a book that comes out every year. And then there's a show in New York at the end of the year. And I submitted to it last year and was kind of like honorable mention. I made it to like the online gallery, but not to the book.
Not to the book.
And then this year submitted and got 2 photos into the book. And so I'll be in the show in New York at the end of the year. And then I submitted to, as I mentioned earlier, like the Paris international call, and got the bronze medal in that competition. And so that'll be on exhibition in December in Paris.
Cool.
So a lot of travel, a lot of like kind of diving into more of like the fine art scene in a way. Yeah. More so just like submitting my work to these juries of like people who are, well known in the industry for like curating art, really. Yeah, right. So I don't really know why I wanted to do this. I just think I wanted my work to, I'm kind of a hoarder of my own work. Like I just, there's so much I haven't posted. So much of Yola I haven't posted. I just like collect so much for some reason.
Of course. Someday, 30 years from now, there's going to be a Yola documentary, and like it's too bad like digital photography doesn't really do, like print sheets the same way. Like when you see that stuff like where there's someday there's going to be 100 photos of that Yola stuff that's going to be in some documentary from about the time and stuff like that.
Yeah. So this was me kind of like just wanting to get my work out there a little bit more and to like prove to myself that it is good. It's good work that can be recognized outside of Nashville. So I've been on cloud nine all year. Yeah. I just found out about the Paris one a couple weeks ago, and I haven't even really shared it with anyone. Right, so that was kind of the big goal for this year. I'm going to continue. There's a few more that I want to submit to. Those deadlines are coming up. It's special though, because it's like, you work so hard for 6 years, and then, the only feedback I was getting was my own and Robby's and like Instagram stats.
Right.
So it's very cool to be pushing this work out and getting critiques from people all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting work into a place where worthy or worthwhile, at least, curators can look into it is a big enough deal as it is,
Yep. And the show in Paris is going to be huge. Like, just really exciting stuff to look forward to.
Yeah. And we started off by talking about how you wanted to do more work in like New York and LA, and now you have a photo that's in Paris,
right?
Like, and especially since you're inspired so much by fashion photography, that like you're having a photo that's going to work.
That's what I was saying. Like, so much happens when you just like release those things that you think are like so cutthroat, like I have to do this or I have to move here. And it's like, just create, keep your head down and work hard, and like, it'll work out.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm learning and picking up on. But as far as work goes, I just photographed Bootsy Collins for his next album. Cool. That was really epic.
Love me some Bootsy.
We
did you get like normal Bootsy, or did you get like turned on Bootsy?
Oh, we got turned on Bootsy. I mean, it was like we had 2 outfits custom for the shoot. Yeah. We shot on his property in Cincinnati, which was cool.
Yeah.
So we shot in his studio and
incredible
in his house and all of that stuff. So
yeah, that
was huge.
I only asked because I was at a clinic of his at Berkeley once, and it was like he wasn't like his name's William, right? His real name's William.
I actually couldn't tell you.
I think that's right.
Yeah, give us the government name.
Yeah, his name is William Earl Collins.
Oh, yeah.
And but meaning like I say that, and that's not the way that like he says that, because I know there are people who say that, but like it felt like we got like William, the bass player, not Bootsy, like for like that hour.
Yeah,
and it was just wild because I don't think anyone that was there had ever heard him not be, like Bootsy.
Right.
And
do you remember what he was like wearing? Was he in a costume?
Nope. He was wearing like, I think he might have had like a pretty low level costume hat on.
Yeah.
But he was just in like a t-shirt and jeans.
Yeah.
Like super rare.
He was wonderful. Just so kind and like down for everything. I think he's in his 70s. I wasn't having him doing backflips or anything, but he was
of course,
up for everything.
Yeah.
As far as what I wanted to do creatively, he was down for it. And also, I mean, his label and his publicist, they sent me alone. Like, I went with my crew.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't have publicists on set. I didn't have creative director, anything, no stylist.
Awesome. Yeah.
And so it was very much, I didn't even have creative direction from the label.
Wow.
They were like, hey,
for an album? Like
yes.
That's incredible.
Which is both stressful and fun, right?
Yeah.
So like stressful because you're hoping that what they see in you, they get at the end of the shoot. But
because that's a lot of trust.
Right.
Like,
but fun because it's just us.
Yeah.
Like, we can do literally whatever. I can pull anything out of my brain that I want.
Mm-hmm.
And they're telling me that they like my work so much that they trust me to do that.
Yeah.
And so that was,
but that was incredible. That it's for an album and not for like,
exactly. Just like
a magazine or something like that or anything like that. Because I could see that happening.
Yeah.
Like for an album, that's wild.
So I sent them the files. I said, hey, this is what my eye saw as the album cover.
Yeah.
And we went for this kind of like Alice in Wonderland, whimsical, like Forbidden Forest type vibe.
Yeah.
And they loved it.
That's
they were
awesome.
beyond excited. So that was really special.
Yeah. Is there a more, I mean, he wasn't always that way because he had the fro for a long time, like at the beginning of like his P-Funk stuff. But is there more of a Mad Hatter in funk since he started like going to like hats?
Yeah.
Like wild hats. So
it's
Alice
definitely
in
Mad
Wonderland
Hatter
thing,
for sure.
like works out super well.
That was definitely the goal.
Yeah.
Big top hat. And also his studio is just, he has, it's just everything. It's everything he's ever done and experienced and liked, and
which is all of it. I mean, that, you know,
the amount of guitars in that studio.
Yeah.
You know, there's everything. What I'm trying to say is everything in his studio has a story.
Yeah.
Everything came from somewhere, from someone. And that was really cool.
Yeah. I mean, in music, like James Brown is everything.
Yeah.
And that, you know,
you walk into his
that played on
foyer,
Sex Machine.
His foyer of his house, it's just all of his like records, like all of his platinums and records that he's produced or played on, and you know, artists that you would have never known he had collaborated with. Yeah. You know? And that was one of the coolest parts to me too. I'm like, man, yeah, you're not just a bass player. You have your hand in the industry. Like, you know,
that's right. Yeah.
Your influence is wide.
Yeah.
So that was an honor for sure.
That's super cool. Last thing I want to ask you is, why did it take you so long to fly on Southwest for the first time?
Why did it take me so long? I can't lie. I think I thought Southwest was like
trashy,
the cousin of Spirit, and like
no, Spirit is definitely worse.
It was the open seating that really got me. Yeah. I was like, no, there's no structure to this. I don't want it. Delta all the way. But then, I started, and those 2 free checked bags, you can't get any better than that.
Yeah, especially if you're trying to like take gear and check it. Like, check bags there where it's
so
at.
For the last 2 years I've flown Southwest. I'm a loyal Southwest member.
Incredible.
I apologize to the Southwest gods for doubting.
Yeah.
And calling you cousin of Spirit. But
I just remember the first time that you had taken a Southwest flight with Robby, and afterward he was like, I just watched Ross' mind get blown for hours about this because it never happened. I was
not excited about it. I was like, oh my God, he's put me on the Southwest flight. I cannot do this. No, but Southwest is great.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I am such a big fan of your work, and I am so excited to see how this continues to grow. It sounds like it's only going to be up and up and up.
I hope so. Thank you for having me.
It's
been absolutely so fun.
Cool. My pleasure. Thanks. Wow. What a really cool chat, huh? Thank you so much to Joseph Ross again for being my guest on the 10th episode of Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know. Thank you so much for being here and listening. Again, if this is your 1st, 5th, 7th, 10th, 3rd and a half, I'm leaving it in. Leaving it. Thank you so much. Thank you. This wouldn't be possible without the support that has been coming in since I told people I was going to do it. If you're not already doing so, as I talked about at the top, so I'll keep it quick. The show page on Instagram is @MattO'DonnellWantsToKnow. I am on Instagram @MattO'Donnell. If you want to write into the show to say anything you want, literally anything, that is MattO'DonnellWantsToKnow@gmail.com. Also, write into that email because I've got stickers, at least for now. I would be happy to just send you one. So just hit me up and we can work something out. But for this time, that is going to do it. Take care of yourself. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. And remember, the best answer to a question is usually another question. See ya!